Good evening, televiewers. Welcome to another edition of Prime on My Media Prime TV, an edition that is going to be looking at some resurgence, of course, for an all Anglophone conference coming from different quarters, especially spearheaded by MKPD, unexpectedly from him. So many persons are wondering whether it is imperative and needful for an Anglophone conference to hold as the crisis rocking the southwest and northwest regions persist. We this evening are going to be guested by one of the outspoken elites of the northwest and southwest regions. We're talking about an Anglophone who has been very vocal on what is described as the Anglophone crisis, in the person of Dr. Simon Munzu, who was the United Nations Secretary General's Deputy Special Representative for Ivory Coast from October 2014 to August 2016. To know that he had previously served the United Nations in different capacities. He was also a key player of the All Anglophone Conferences 1 and 2, was a member of the tripartite, the Constitutional Committee that worked for the putting in place of the constitution that guides Cameroon. Today we are going to be discussing with him why he has been silent over these past months, even with growing cries for an Anglophone president, the need for registration, amongst others. Good evening, Dr. Simon Munzu. We are glad to have you on Prime once again.
Good evening, Mr. Kum. Thanks for having me, and good evening to your viewers.
How are you doing over there?
I'm doing okay, by the grace of God. We take it one day at a time, but so far so good. Everything is fine. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Okay, I want us to go back to the origins of what failed, called the All Anglophone Conference, that you actually initiated, because I know how it all started, though it was later championed by the late Christian Cardinal Tumi. We'll start by asking you the motives behind the push for that conference that never took place.
Well, Mr. Kum, we do have, or let me put it this way, we cannot talk of the Anglophone General Conference, or for that matter, any other coming together of Anglophones, without talking about the Anglophone problem. So everyone knows that there is an Anglophone problem, and it is not complicated. The Anglophone problem consists merely of the fact that, in violation of the understanding which the two territories, the Southern Cameroons and Republic of Cameroon, had when they came together in 1961, because that understanding was that the two territories were going to be governed together in the form of a federation. And the reason for that is that we all, those who negotiated the deal, recognized that the Anglophone coming into the union with the British colonial heritage, the Francophones coming into the union with the French colonial heritage, it was necessary for each of those two territories to continue to govern itself while they worked together to strengthen national unity. Okay? But as we all know, in 1972, that arrangement was abandoned. And since then, there has been the systematic domination, taking over, so if you like, assimilation of Anglophone Cameroon by the two successive regimes that have run our country from Yaoundé since 1961. And that is, if you like, the root cause of the crisis that we have today. So if we think about solving this crisis, we have to be prepared to sit down in a national conference to discuss the crisis and its roots, and then find a solution. And that calls for a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem, a genuine national dialogue. But Mr. Kum, the people of the Northwest and Southwest do not have any common institutions to represent and speak for them. Okay, they don't have a they don't have a government, they don't have an assembly. In short, they don't have any common institutions. So if they have to be represented as a group to air their grievances, how are they going to do that? Who is going to speak for them? Who is going to lay forth those grievances vis-a-vis the other party, which is the government in Yaoundé? So that is a fundamental issue that we all have. And we Cameroonians cannot pretend not to understand this simple situation. It is therefore for the purpose of finding a solution, if you like, addressing the Anglophone problem, which since 2016 has led to the Anglophone crisis and even an armed conflict, that we have to continue to call for the convening of a national dialogue on the situation in the Northwest and Southwest, if you like, on the Anglophone problem. But since the Northwest and Southwest don't have common representatives and common institutions, such a national dialogue needs to be preceded by a preparatory meeting amongst Anglophones. And it is this preparatory meeting which we have been calling for since this crisis started, and to which we gave the name the Anglophone General Conference. So as you bear witness, since this crisis started, we have been calling for the convening of an Anglophone General Conference to prepare the ground for engaging with the government in Yaoundé on resolving the Anglophone problem and ending the crisis in the Northwest and Southwest. So for the benefit of your viewers, it was important to recall, to stress this background, which is very simple to understand, but which people are pretending does not constitute a problem, whereas in fact it does.
Now, Dr. Simon Munzu, I saw how you started this initiative. Tell us, when did it dawn on you that there was need for this conference, and when you got this idea, what are the moves you undertook for us to come out with what became the call for the AGC that was led by late Christian Kadnatumi?
Thank you for that question, because by the way, I'm not the only one who is conscious of the existence of the Anglophone problem. A few people may want to pretend, but I think right across the country, amongst Anglophones and Francophones of all walks of life, of all regions, and perhaps, and even outside Cameroon, it is clearly known that there is an Anglophone problem. So the difference, however, is that prior to 2016, this problem had been articulated by peaceful means. I will not take the time of your viewers to go back to the history of the AAC1, AAC2, the birth of the SCNC and all of that. All this derived from the effort of Anglophones to put the Anglophone problem on the table for the Cameroonian nation to discuss the Anglophone problem. Therefore, in 2016, when the second wave, or the most recent wave, I should say, of Anglophone expressing their grievances broke, we felt that once again there needed to be a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem. We were hoping that the government in Yaoundé would not, in 2016, 2017, continue to deny the existence of the problem as it did in the previous 2 or 3 decades, 20 or 30 years, you know. And so a number of us, I was not the only one, a group of us sitting mainly in Buea, decided that we should push for the convening of an Anglophone meeting to prepare the ground for a conference about the Anglophone problem. And for that purpose, we created what we call the Anglophone Dialogue Forum, the ADF, you know. But later on, when the separatist movement started, and one of the armed groups of the separatists was called the ADF, we changed the name to the ACDF, Anglophone Cameroon Dialogue Forum, so as to avoid confusion. Okay, so it was as an offshoot of the Anglophone Dialogue Forum that we began to contact people whom we thought were best placed to call a meeting of Anglophones. For that purpose, we approached the political parties represented in the National Assembly and in the Senate, Anglophones, which for us, fortunately, was only the CPDM and the SDF, because at the time, and I think it is still the case today, all the Anglophone members of Parliament or the National Assembly and all the Anglophone senators were either CPDM or SDF. So we had to deal with only 2 parties. And I went to Yaoundé, held meetings with every single member of Parliament, every single senator from the North and Southwest. And later on, 2 meetings with the SDF parliamentary group in Yaoundé. And the SDF agreed to work with the CPDM parliamentarians to convene the meeting. But later on, and I got early indications from the late Honorable Lifaka that the CPDM members of Parliament will be coming on board as well. Unfortunately, later on, she told us that they didn't get the clearance from their hierarchy, so they could not join the endeavor. And because of that, the SDF pulled out as well. Okay? So our hope that the elected representatives of our people who championed this cause were dashed. And that's when I turned towards church leaders, capitalizing on their moral authority, their moral influence in our society. And to cut a long story short, because it's a very long story, how I got in touch with all the bishops of the North and Southwest, the
imams,
executive president of the Cameroon Baptist Convention in Bamenda, the imams of Bamenda and Buea and all of that. So to cut a long story short, I went to all these people in Buea, in Bamenda. For the bishops, I went even to Nso, Bishop of Kumbu. And at some point, I also appealed to traditional rulers. So again, went to Kumba to have meetings with the late von Mukete, went to Mankon to meet the late von Angwafo. I went to Nso to meet the fall of Nso. I went to Bafut to meet the fall of Bafut, and so on, many others in this endeavor. And at the end of the day, it is only the religious leaders who felt willing and free to play that role of convener under the leadership of the late Christian Cardinal Tumi. So when the leaders when these religious leaders met for the first time in the home of the late Cardinal Tumi, based on all the work I had done to bring them together, and they agreed to convene the conference, they turned to me and said, well, then you have to take charge of organizing it. We will convene it, but we cannot organize it. And I said, well, I will gladly play that role. So I agreed to be the coordinator of the organizing committee.
Okay.
And co-opted other willing people to join that committee, and we set to work.
Okay.
So I've heard, Mr. Kum, I've heard people try. I mean, there are those who, trying to create problems where there aren't any, controversy where there ought not to be any.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you that you were the first spokesperson of the Anglophone General Conference and coordinator of the organization's committee, but you stepped down in November 2018 and was replaced by Mr. Eli Smith. Many persons have asked why. Can we know why you were replaced?
Okay, well, thanks for that question, because indeed it's an issue that's been lingering in many people's minds for quite a while. So thanks for this opportunity to clarify it as I understand it. But before I do that, let me also say that, of course, people create problems, controversies where there is no need for any. I've heard people argue as to whether the AGC was initiated by the late Christian Cardinal Tumi or by Simon Munzu. And I have always answered them that it is beside the point. There is no that question is not important. The late Cardinal, here, learning from the Bishop of Kumbu what I was doing, or the advocacy that I was leading amongst the bishops, listening to some of the audios that I brought out, the text of which, the transcription of which was published in an issue of Cameroon Panorama, he was keen to find out more about this idea of an Anglophone General Conference. And so he asked me, he took my number from Bishop George Mkuo of Kumbo and called me. And I traveled from Victoria, Limbe, if you like, to Douala to meet him. And after we discussed, we agreed that we should work together to have for this conference to happen. So from that moment on, it became a very close collaboration between me and the late Cardinal. I was so happy that someone of his standing, his stature in our society, and his clout, not only at home but abroad, had accepted to lead other religious, leaders to play this important role of convening the conference, something which was going to be so beneficial to Anglophones for a start, but ultimately to Cameroon as a whole, as a pathway towards resolving the Anglophone problem and averting the exacerbation of the Anglophone crisis. So as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter to me whether people say that the Anglophone General Conference was one person's brainchild or not. The important thing is that many of us were prepared to work together to make this happen. Now, coming to your question, Mr. Kum, there's been a lot of misconception, misrepresentation, and all of that about the circumstances in which I stepped down. But let me tell you this: three things happened. First, we went to Yaoundé, if I remember clearly, on the 12th of November, 2018, to brief all the ambassadors there on the invitation of the delegate of the European Union he called a meeting of all ambassadors in Yaoundé and asked us to come and brief them on the initiative, because at the time they kept saying that as far as they are concerned, that was the only game in town. They told us so. And so I went to Yaoundé with the cardinal and with the moderator of the PCC and the two imams, PCC, Presbyterian Church of Cameroon. The two imams in Boya and Bamenda sent their representatives, and Mr. Eddie Smith, who was the media and communication officer within our organizing committee, went with us. Okay. Now, after we had briefed the diplomatic community about progress on this initiative, and they renewed their support for the initiative, we had a debriefing meeting in the evening at the Mvolier, the Catholic Center in Mvolier, where the cardinal was staying. And there, two things happened, or two facts emerged. The first was the intensity of the threats that we, the cardinal, but more so me, that we were receiving from the separatists outside Cameroon. In fact, I remember that Mr. Chris Anu, the day before, had issued a video saying that he knows that this meeting is going to take place with the diplomats, but once again calling us all sorts of names and threatening me and all of that. So we put the issue of the threat to our personal safety on the table in this evaluation meeting. The other issue was the state of preparedness of the location for the conference in Boya. We were far from ready, and we were something like 2 weeks to the expected date of the meeting. It was like around the 25th of November, and here we're talking around on the 12th of November. And so I expressed the view that given the very specific threats to my person, it was going to be impossible for me to be physically present in Boya for the conference. Secondly, that as it emerged at that meeting, we still had a lot of ground to cover in terms of the logistical preparations for the meeting. And therefore, we needed additional time for all of that. Now, the cardinal took the view that the meeting had been postponed once before, and he didn't want it to be postponed yet again. So he said we must go ahead regardless. And at that point, but at the same time, he said, well, he understands my concerns about my personal safety. I remember him going on to say that, well, if he had a wife and children, he too would be just as worried as I was about my personal concerns, given the way that the separatists were, kidnapping people and killing some, like they did with Chief Ito of Kudutiti and so on. So the threat was not a vain one. The threat was something to take seriously, So the cardinal said, well, if he guesses that if he was married and he had children, he would have a hard time taking a decision, but that for him it was easy. He would go to Boya regardless. And so there was no question of the meeting being postponed. Okay, so we left that venue, we left things at that stage that evening. But in my mind, without having to come to a definitive decision on whether to go ahead or not to go ahead. Anyway, that afternoon, the Cardinal and Ellie Smith traveled back to Douala. Now, I don't know what conversations they had on their way to Douala, but as it turned out, as soon as they arrived in Douala, around 2 p.m. of that day, the Cardinal summoned a press conference at which he announced that I had stepped down as coordinator of the organizing committee of the AGC, on security grounds, and that he had designated Mr. Eli Smith to take over from me. Now, that came to me as a surprise, to the point that when the first social media messages started going around that I had stepped down, I didn't believe it. And I was on the verge of issuing a counter statement to say that this is not true. We are still discussing. When someone sent me a press statement saying that this, what I thought was just rumor, had in fact been announced by the cardinal at a press conference. So at that point, I was placed before a fait accompli, and not to create the impression that there was some kind of fight or disagreement or whatever within amongst the people pushing for the AGC, I decided to accept what had happened and step back, confirmed that I had stepped down from the position of coordinator on security grounds, because I can imagine how people would have exploited negatively any suggestion that there was some kind of rift between me and His Eminence the Cardinal. Anyway, but at the same time, as I told Eli Smith and the others, I said, well, I may be stepping down as coordinator, but I'll be in the background, prepared to make my contribution when necessary. Unfortunately, as I later on learned, under Mr. Eli Smith, the organizing committee did not meet even once, not once. And as we know, subsequently, Mr. Smith, I think, went on to work with the government, with the Prime Minister, and the Cardinal was left doing nothing better than to administer a poll which he conducted to test the opinion of Anglophones on whether they wanted a federation or unitary state or separation and all of that. The rest of the story you know as well as I do. Yep. So that's the background to this story.
Yeah, but this AGC never took place, and some people claim that it was because government refused to authorize it. Others feel that it is because of the harsh opposition the AGC received from the separatists themselves. What would have accounted for this conference never holding?
No, I think as I said, I would put it down to three factors. The first factor, indeed, was the hostility of the separatists to the holding of this conference, because they consistently said that they didn't want the conference to be held in what they call amber land, therefore anywhere in the northwest or southwest regions, and to the point where all our preparatory meetings were held in Douala. Members of the organizing committee who were based in Bamenda, such as Mr. Abdul Karim, had to travel from Bamenda to Douala whenever we had to meet. Those who were based in Buea traveled from Buea to come to Douala whenever we had to meet. So that contributed to the logistical difficulties surrounding the preparation of the conference. So the first factor, which is undeniable, was the threat that separatists constantly voiced vis-a-vis persons who were organizing, who were behind the initiative, but also the initiative itself, saying that it will not take place anywhere in the north or southwest regions. And at the same time, a second factor, if you like, was the attitude of the government. Now, the government's attitude was ambivalent all along, because, by the way, I went and briefed them on what we're doing, because, we weren't going to, the idea was for us to have a preparatory meeting whose resolutions, recommendations, and all of that would be sent to the government to serve as a basis for an Anglophone General Conference to be organized, a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem to be organized by the government, So it was out of the question that we act in secret as far as the government is concerned. So right from the beginning, we made it clear to the government that we were working on this initiative. And I have to say that the government officials never said, go ahead, we're not going to block anything, nor did they say, don't go ahead, we're going to block everything. I mean, I had meetings at the presidency, first with the late Belinga when he was still director of civil cabinet. But after he passed away, I continued to have meetings about this with his successor, the minister Ayolo. I had meetings with other members of government about this. And so, and then of course at regional level, I consulted the governor of the Southwest region and so on. So I had meetings with government officials, and at no point did they say to us clearly, don't hold this meeting. On the other hand, they never came out saying, go ahead. But they had, if you like, something in their favor there, which was partly the fault of us, the organizers, in the sense that we didn't address a letter to the Dio of Goya for notifying him of or declaring our intention to hold a meeting until I think about a week or so before the expected date of the meeting, when the Imam of Boya, acting for the College of Conveners, deposited that declaration at the Dio's office. And I can tell you that up to this day, the government's approach was, as it quite often does, was to just stay quiet. So the government did not respond to the correspondence received from the Imam of Boya, as far as I know, up to this day. And therefore, for the government, there was no categorical yes and no categorical no. But the third factor, and we have to be honest about that, the third factor was that as at the day when the meeting was supposed to be held in Boya, as I said earlier, we ourselves, the conveners and organizers, were far from ready because of the prevailing security environment and the impact it had on our ability to organize things on the ground in Boya. Perhaps if we had continued, we probably would have considered a different venue or different modalities, I don't know. But I want to stress that those three factors contributed, variously to what finally happened, namely the fact that the AGC did not take place.
Now, at the time, you guys were planning for the AGC to hold in Boya. You received a very hostile response from the separatists, and you say the government was not too clear about whether they were for or against it. How prepared, mobilized were Anglophones to be part of this conference, going by what was prevailing at the time? And were you sure that the success of the conference would have changed the dynamics at the time, given that already you people were already blacklisted amongst the separatists?
Well, I mean, blacklisted amongst the separatists as a starting point, yes, and that was understandable. But part of our strategy was indeed to reach out to the separatists and get them to see from a purely objective standpoint the necessity for this conference to hold, because, I mean, it was clear, even at that time, that the separatists were not going to win independence by war, you know. So we wanted them to see that much as their initiative might be understandable, given the history of the 40 years and more during which Anglophones had been trying their best to bring this problem, or bring the government to admit that there was this problem. Obviously, we could understand the sense of frustration that could have driven some Anglophones, especially Anglophone young people, you know, who lost patience with our generation, saying that we had been too, you know, we weren't, in short, justifying their recourse to violence based on the fact that the government did not respond over all these decades. So we could understand where the separatists were coming from, but we were also hoping to get them to understand that the violence approach was not going to deliver anything, and that therefore they should be prepared to settle for the compromise solution, which was that we engage a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem that would ultimately lead to new arrangements in the country which put an end to this domination and assimilation of Anglophones, while the Northwest and Southwest remain, you know, a part of Cameroon. We believed strongly that down the line we're going to be able to persuade them to come down to follow that path. But unfortunately, all the initiatives stopped, they were derailed, and the consequences of that are here for us to see today.
Dr. Munzu, we are talking about 2018. How and why were you too sure that the separatist or the move for independence was not going to succeed?
Mr. Kum, for that, perhaps you need to bear in mind that I spent the longest part of my career with the UN, essentially in conflict and post-conflict countries, and especially in countries where there were, you know, there were armed groups fighting for one cause or the other, and you know, you could tell from the lack of organization amongst the separatists, especially in 2018, the lack of equipment, the lack of lethal power, and a whole host of for one. But secondly, the lack of support from the international community, you know, put all that put together, it was not easy. It was not difficult for someone who had some expertise on matters of this kind, based on what he had observed and even got involved with in other countries, that a rebellion, a so-called revolution conducted in the manner in which separatists were conducted, didn't have much prospect of success. One could tell that even in 2017, 2018.
Okay. Now, I'm sure you are aware of the call for the Anglophone crisis to look into the Anglophone problem coming from where one would least expect, from MK PD, have you seen the proposal, and do you see the need for such a conference today, and what would be the difference from what was supposed to take place in 2018?
Well, in fact, what I'm seeing on your screen here, I'm seeing for the first time. I did hear in the course of the past week that there were some people calling for the an Anglophone conference. I wasn't sure who was behind it. I have not seen the detailed proposal to be able to say how feasible it may or may not be. But one thing is clear. One thing is clear. There is a crisis in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, which has to end. And that crisis cannot end with the status quo, with leaving things as they are, because leaving things as they are means what? Means the continuation of the assimilation, domination of the northwest and southwest regions. And I don't believe, this is my sincere thought, I don't believe that any Cameroonian of any generation would accept that in Cameroon, Anglophones simply become subsumed to Francophones. No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You know, so, and I say that as someone who passionately believes in the need to keep Cameroon one. Okay? But for us to keep Cameroon one, we don't have to make Cameroon uniform. No, we have to acknowledge the specificities of the two regions and give them, each of them, the possibility to run its affairs in application of a system that it knows. It's as simple as that. If down the line, in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, 20 years' time, Cameroonians succeed in forging a system that is originally Cameroonian, not derived from the British, not derived from the French, originally Cameroonian, to conduct their affairs, we will all be very happy to embrace such a system. We will say with pride that we Cameroonians have, formulated our own system to govern our affairs. Forget about the colonial heritage. I'll be quite happy for us to arrive there. But we are not there yet. And no, let's not pretend that we are. We're not there yet. We are in a system where public affairs are conducted based on what we inherited from the British and what we inherited from the French. And the question today is, what is the justification for making that system take into account only the French heritage? That's a question. That's a question. You know, and I don't see any generation of Anglophones, even those who were born only yesterday, who would get up and say, yeah, we recognize ourselves as coming from the northern and southwest region, but we are quite happy to be swallowed, to be assimilated. It wouldn't happen. Therefore, there is still a need to tackle the Anglophone problem. And for that, there is still a need to have a genuine dialogue. I emphasize genuine because we know that the major national dialogue took place in 2019, but everyone knew that the way in which it was conducted did not allow scope for the root causes of the Anglophone problem to be actually examined. So we need a new national dialogue on the situation in the north and southwest. In short, a national dialogue on the Anglophone problem. But again, as I said earlier, in the absence of common institutions for northwest and southwest, it's going to be necessary that before the northwest and southwest go to sit at the table with the government in Yaoundé to discuss those issues, they should have a meeting amongst themselves so as to agree on what major things are they going to put at the table when they engage with the government. Who is going to represent them in those discussions with the government, and so on. That cannot be achieved without the opportunity to sit down amongst Anglophones, and hence the necessity for an Anglophone General Conference, or whatever other name it may eventually be given. From that standpoint, even without seeing the details of this new proposal you're talking about, just the principle of the necessity for a conference, I wholeheartedly adhere to that. The rest now is in the detail. It will be good to see what exactly is being proposed.
Yes, how easy is it going to be to have this Anglophone General Conference in the current context, where we have leaders of the separatist leaders who would say if anything has to happen, we are the ones to talk on behalf of Anglophones. How do we differentiate? Where do we draw the line between representing Anglophones and representing separatists or Ambazonians? How do we even bring them together to be able to engage the government?
Well, Mr. Kum, that's a good question you're asking there, and we need to address it without beating about the bush. You would agree that long before 2016, when the current crisis started, there was an Anglophone problem, right? And long before 2016, Anglophones have made efforts to bring this problem to the attention of the government in Yaoundé and to engage with them to find a solution. Was there a separatist war at the time? Was there a war of independence being fought at the time? No. So as long as there is an Anglophone problem, there is a need to resolve it, and its resolution does not require recourse to the use of armed force, or to force in short. So it is clear that a peaceful approach to resolving the Anglophone problem is called for. And the mere fact that in 2017, a number of people sitting abroad and orchestrating a number of other people in Cameroon took up arms to say that they were fighting a war of liberation does not change the fundamentals, does not automatically make the issue for separatists. No. Now, since 2017, when separatist armed groups have been engaged in battle with the government forces of Cameroon, we recognize that there is a new dimension, and that new dimension is precisely the military character that has been given to what otherwise is a legitimate grievance of the Anglophones that goes back to 1961, and which the Anglophones have been highlighting since 1961. Okay? So, there is a phase, there would be a phase, as we look for a solution, there would be a phase where the dialogue is only between the government and separatists. And the purpose of that dialogue would be for those two parties who are warring parties, warring factions, for them to agree on a peaceful settlement of the war which they are fighting each other now. Okay? That has nothing to do with the fundamental issue of the Anglophone problem, which consists in the unacceptable domination, assimilation, marginalization of Anglophones in Cameroon. Okay? Now, when the government and the separatists arrive at an understanding. They end their war, which was the purpose, which was what we're hoping that they would do under the auspices of the Canadian peace process, which was stillborn back in January of, I think, last year or the year before that. Right. So we have to understand, therefore, and we have to understand that there are two tracks, and those two tracks have to be pursued. There is a track that involves the government and the separatists as armed parties as parties to an armed conflict. They have to sort out the military aspects of what is going on and put an end to the armed conflict. But parallel to that, the government of Cameroon, remember, I'm not saying francophones. This is not something about francophone versus anglophone. No. The domination, marginalization, and assimilation of anglophones in Cameroon has been orchestrated not by the francophone population, but by two successive regimes under President Lahijo and President Biya, who happen to be francophone. Okay, let's not mix things up in that respect. So, going back to the point I was making, there are two tracks. There is the track that involves only the government and the separatists. Negotiate the terms under which you end the war. But at the same time, we, the Cameroonian people, and especially the people of the Northwest and Southwest regions, are entitled to engage with the same Yaoundé regime to say this Anglophone problem has been on for more than 40, 50 years. It is time that we examined its root causes and resolved it, culminating in the two regions being granted a sufficient degree of autonomy to run their affairs while they remain an integral part of Cameroon. So those are two different processes, and the two can go in parallel.
Okay, let me take some persons watching us. Tebong Haddison says, I'm watching you guys from Bamenda. Sam Rich says, I'm watching you from Ngaundiri. Nuchak Simon is watching from Bamenda. Prince Banjo Bihai says, okay. Brittany Boo says, live from Bonaberi Douala Biseke. To be precise, Prof. Tayi Zebulun is watching from Boya. Sullivan Dukong is watching us from Kambe Plateau. Foba Wonjio Abraham is watching us from Yaoundé. Ada Rombe Koto says, I'm watching from Yaoundé. Ndi Betran is watching us from Yaoundé. Possibility Major Acha says, I'm watching you guys from Tico United Tangwa. Jocelyn is watching from Edea. Kweche Emmanuel is watching us from Mutengene. Kelda Nash is watching us from Tico. Pascal Afumbom is watching us from Bamenda. Ale Bless Chair is watching us from Befang. Honorable to Sam Kennedy is watching us from Limbe. Julius Dibuma is watching from Kumba. Montana Nganje is watching us from Boya. Jam Kenneth Song is watching us from Bonaberi. Ernest Ngwan Maknone is watching us from Elak Oku. Mana Epenatus Fogo is watching us from Dian. Jenry Cham is watching us from Boya. Ikamaya Zubi is watching us from Limbe. Ikane Dion is watching us from Mabeta Njanga Limbe. Tifu Aningwa is watching us from Batoke Limbe. Can Prince Ken is watching us from Fika Foot headquarters. Mbi Allen says, I'm watching us, you guys are from Simbok Yaoundé. Nkwan Leslie is watching from Bamenda. Lucky Child is watching from Hivikam. That should be around Kribi Edea. Chance KB Bright is watching from Kumba. Tima Judith is watching from Yaoundé. Anon Echu. Okay. Njola Brenda is watching from Kumbu. Now, we are talking about the crisis and the need for an Anglophone conference. At this juncture, how do we get to achieving one, Dr. Simon Munzu? Who should take that initiative or we should go back to the foundations of the AGC?
Well, Mr. Kum, there is a problem, the Anglophone problem, okay?
Yeah.
And there is a need to resolve it if Cameroon is going to prosper in peace. Because this problem is not going to be wished away. When we started highlighting it back in the 90s, we resorted to writing memoranda and adopting resolutions that were forwarded to Yaoundé and all of that, and they were ignored. Our generation was succeeded by another who, because by the way, we were talking only of, as a solution, we're talking about a return to federation, okay? There came a second wave of people embodying this, let me say, this struggle, so to speak, and they took their grievance or took their demands one notch higher by saying that they were tired, they had gone beyond asking for a return to federation. Now it has to be separation and independence. Okay? They did that in the later life of the SCNC under a succession of leaders. All right? But their method was still peaceful. Okay? They advocated separation as opposed to federation that we advocated. They advocated independence as opposed to federation that we advocated. But like us, their preferred method was peace, a peaceful approach to obtaining separation or independence. This more recent wave, as you can see, has gone one notch higher. They are also advocating separation leading to independence, but unlike the second wave, they are saying they have gone into they have chosen, you know, the path of war to obtain that separation and independence. This is to tell you that the Anglophone problem is real, that it has a life from generation after generation of Anglophones, and that the methods chosen in each generation may not necessarily be the ones that previous generations chose. So, the time has come now that the entire nation is paying attention to this problem. Now that all of Africa is paying attention to this problem. Now that the entire world, especially under the auspices of the United Nations, but also under the auspices of multilateral organizations such as the Commonwealth, the Francophonie, the African Union, and so on, are paying attention to this problem. Now is the time for Cameroonians in general, and Anglophone Cameroonians in particular, to get together and exert pressure for something to move. And I believe that if the general Anglophone population, instead of sitting on the fence and crying how they are victims, but not being willing to do anything about their victim status, I'm afraid there wouldn't be a solution, and yet there needs to be a solution. So what I'm saying is that the drive, let's make no mistake about it, the drive for engagement to find a lasting solution to this problem has to come from the Anglophone population, men, women, and children, youth, and so on, who should not spend their time simply exchanging messages on WhatsApp and all of that. No. People can organize to constitute a force to put these demands on the table. And let me just say, because this may sound theoretical, but let me just remind your viewers that Anglophones have done this before. You know, don't we remember how Yaoundé resisted our demand for a GCE board when they started messing up with our GCE after London University dissociated itself from the Cameroon GCE? Don't we remember how the Ministry of Education in Yaoundé messed around with the GCE to the point of the entire world losing confidence and trust in our in certificates delivered by the Cameroon GCE system? Against that, Anglophones went to the street in Yaoundé and elsewhere, were treated with water cannon and all of that, to demand the creation of a credible GCE board. After a while, what happened? We got the GCE board. We did not fire a shot, Mr. Kum. No one took up arms for that to happen. Mr. Kum, in an effort, again, as part of the attempt to assimilate us, Yaoundé decided that henceforth, in all the 10 regions of Cameroon, we're going to have a 2-shift working day, where people arrive in the office at 7:30, as they were doing in Francophone Cameroon, take a lunch break at noon, go home, have lunch, drink wine, have siesta and all of that, and then come back to work at 2:30 and close around 5:30, 6. That was the system they had in Francophone Cameroon. In Anglophone Cameroon, we started work at 7:30 and worked continuously to 2 p.m. and the day ended. Parents went home, took good care of their children who were coming back from school, cultivated their farms, attended their meetings, participated in activities in their churches and all of that. That's a system we had. And Yaoundé tried to change that, to force us to adopt the one-shift system. What happened? The population of what we call today the North and Southwest said, "Yet, we're not having any of that." And they refused to budge. President Biya set up the Joseph Zambo Commission and sent the commission out to go and canvass opinion about the 2 alternatives. And what, at the end of the process, what did the Zambo Commission report and recommend? They recommended that the one-shift system be adopted, not just be allowed to continue in the North and Southwest, but that it should be adopted in all the 10 regions of Cameroon. That is why you have today a one-shift system that goes up to 3 p.m. in all the 10 regions of Cameroon. Again, we did not fire a shot, you know. So I cite these examples to say that if Cameroonians really, in this case, Anglophones, who are aware of their plight, they know they are the ones who know what they are suffering. They are the ones who know what this war has cost them. They are the ones who are bound to ask them, what are we getting out of this war? We are not for separation, we are not for independence, but what are we getting at the end of the day? What are we getting out of this? Okay. They have to sit up and defend their interests. And for that, they don't need to take up arms. They need to demonstrate a sense of purpose, of togetherness, of acting as one, as they have done before. Let me conclude by pointing out that even at the beginning of this crisis, Mr. Kum, at the beginning of this crisis, when the teachers and the lawyers, so epitomized, if you like, by Agbobala and Fontemniba, when the teachers and lawyers within the framework of the consortium first issued a call for ghost town on Mondays. Was that call not followed? The separatists were not anywhere around. They were not on the ground. The Monday ghost town did not begin as a separatist invention. The separatists took advantage of it because it was the only thing that could make them boast and say they are in charge of Northern and Southwest when they stop people from going anywhere on Mondays. But the initial ghost town, which began on the 9th of January 2017, was not decreed by the separatists. It was decreed by the consortium, Agbobala and Fontainebleau.
Okay.
Peaceful advocates of a resolution of the Anglophone problem. But the entire population in the Northern and Southwest, in the cities and in the villages, followed that call. And the impact of that call is there till today.
Okay, but
so I stop there, but is to say that, contrary to what people may think, try to make it look as if taking on the government is impossible by peaceful means. No, it's not impossible. If the population, if the people are determined to say enough is enough, we are peaceful people. We are part of this country. But for us to be part of this country doesn't mean that we have to be second-class citizens in this country, that we have to be assimilated, that we have to be marginalized. No. So I am still convinced that the day will come when Francophone and Anglophone, whether under the present regime or the one that follows it, whatever that may be, the day will come when the Anglophone problem will have to be resolved, and its resolution will take place within the framework of a genuine national dialogue on the Anglophone problem, and that genuine national dialogue will have to be preceded by a preparatory meeting of Anglophones amongst themselves.
Yeah, but
now,
Doctor,
if the government, okay, let's go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted us to look at something you raised earlier on when you started this last submission. You said the African Union, la Francophonie, the Commonwealth, all eyes were on Cameroon. This crisis that's going on. Do you really have the impression that the international community's eyes are on what is happening, or the crisis has largely been neglected, as has been reported by some NGOs?
No, I mean the problem in Cameroon, the situation in Cameroon, of course, is drawing international attention. The international community is watching, of course. I mean, Mr. Kum, you are a journalist and you chronicle these things. I'm sure you would agree with me that when this crisis started, we saw the visit to Cameroon of the Secretary General of the United Nations, the visit to Cameroon of the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, the visit to Cameroon of the Secretary General of the Francophonie, the visit to Cameroon of the President of the Council of the African Union, etc. These are international multilateral organizations, let alone talking about bilateral visits, by foreign ministers of certain countries, presidents of other countries, etc., etc. And there were virtually unanimous calls from all those quarters for this crisis to be resolved by addressing the root causes. Okay? So, I mean, the crisis has been the subject of discussion at the United Nations, at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, and so on. So there is international attention. What is not happening, and that is largely thanks to the separatists, is that although these countries are taking an interest in what is happening in Cameroon, they are not prepared to countenance the breaking up of Cameroon. In other words, they are not prepared to support the push towards separation or independence. For them, that's very clear. Okay? And therefore, their engagement has been timid and limited because what they would have engaged themselves in doing by negotiating a peace and all of that has been stymied by the stubbornness of two factions which are shooting it out. The government, on the one hand, did not show much interest in the Swiss process, while some factions of the separatists were keen on that process and others were not. Subsequently came the more recent Canadian peace process, peace initiative. And there, after we had been told that the government and the separatists both signed up to this initiative, you know how disappointed we all were when barely a few days after the process was announced by the Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the government of Cameroon announced that it had nothing to do with it. You know, so what has been hampering the effective engagement of the international community is not lack of attention to the problem. It is that the attitude of the two main protagonists does not give the international community the leeway to proceed as it should. Now, who is going to, and that is where the population comes in. That's where the population comes in, to give the international community a third way with which to work. You know, and here it will not be just the population of North and Southwest, by extension, the population of Cameroon as a whole, but we need to re-engage discussion, consultations amongst the population here and there. We should be doing something instead of spending our time as we all do now, just passing comments day after day on television panels. People go there and express opinions. WhatsApp groups, people are expressing opinions without anything crystallizing into a strategy and a plan of action. That is what is missing, and that is what the Cameroonian people ought to go towards.
Okay.
You know.
Let me take some reactions from those watching. Watching from Fiango, Biando Gilbert. Good evening to you. This one says, I'm watching live from Simbok. Theodore Mengot. Good evening to you, Theodore. Agbo East from Tiku Misaku. No Anglophone can trust leaders today. They need to do more. Okay. This one says, the maker is watching from Boya. Watching. Good evening to you, the maker. Hope business is doing well out there. Good evening. I'm Lionel Ngwashi watching from Yaoundé. This one says, I'm Ba Godfred Stanley. I'm watching from Kumba. Good evening to you, Ba Godfred. Henry Abongwa is watching you guys from Kribi. Henry Abongwa is watching us from Kribi. Enjoying the program from Essos, Yaoundé, Kum. Clifton Chi watching there. Prince Paul Akila is watching us from Yaoundé. Good evening to you, Prince Paul. Good evening, Mr. Leo. I'm Emmanuel Bonsisi. I'm watching you guys from Kumbo. Good evening to you guys watching us from Bui Division. I'm so happy with all your chosen topics. I love your coordination. Good evening to you. This one says, I'm Chin Jude watching from Makibum in Fumbot. This one says, good evening, Mr. Leo. I'm Mba Julius watching from Ebolova, the land of the rotten chimpanzee. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Simon is watching us from Wotutu in Limbe. Good evening to you in the studio. I'm Lovett watching from Aboya. Hello, house. Jibwin Emmanuel, Jeep Legacy is watching from Bona Musadi, not far from here in Douala. Good evening, Mr. Leo. I'm Betek Cyprian, watching from Modela Village in Menchum Valley Subdivision. I love this program. It's so educative. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Fosi Lovely, watching from Yaoundé. Good evening. Kuma Isidore, watching from Boya. Good evening, sir. Litwin Isaiah, watching from Mbandumu Simbok, Yaoundé. Good evening to you guys. I'm Clinton Donovan, watching from Bonadip Kombo Mile 4 Limbe. I'm really enjoying your program. Thank you. Isuka Ferdinand, watching from Diboncha. This one says, hi, I'm watching you guys from Fumbot. Iskwala Emmanuel. Good evening to you, Emmanuel. Greetings, Mr. Kuma. Michael Matike, watching your interesting program from Likumba. Tico Subdivision. Good evening, Mr. Leo. Okay. Yes, we're going to talk Fika Food, I'm sure, tomorrow after. This one says, the crisis have gone beyond the Anglophone crisis. Both parties don't want to end the crisis with no party showing good faith. The civilians are paying the price. Okay. Greetings to Dr. Simon Munzu. Photo Ansem, watching live, okay, from Dubai. Good evening to you. Oops. Good evening, Mr. Leo. It's a very interesting program. Can you please send me the documents you presented on the screen and the photos? Eric is watching us from Betwa. That's in the east region of Cameroon. I am watching your program. I'm Grand Anga in Bonaberi, Douala. Good evening, Mr. Kum, writing from Amanda. Okay. Good evening to you guys. So many messages are coming in. Dr. Munzu, you say it is time for the civil society to engage. But the question is, how do we engage? The civil society was very vocal. In the past, the religious authorities were also very vocal. You said in the beginning that you engaged traditional rulers and they were timid. You engage lawmakers both from the CPDM and the Social Democratic Front. The CPDM said they were coming in, but they later backed out, and then the SDF backed out. The traditional rulers themselves were lukewarm in 2018, and the religious authorities welcomed the idea and championed the call. Do you think going through the same route would make a difference this time around?
Well, I don't see what alternative there is. I don't see any other route except violence, which has already been tried, and we don't see what good it has done. Except, I mean, what it has done rather, it's a lot of evil to our society in every sector of it. You know, so I mean, I understand that it's not an easy sell. Right now, for the simple reason that Cameroonians in general, not just Anglophones, the Cameroonians in general, have been battered in their psyche, in their minds, for so long that they don't even believe anymore that sovereignty, power lies with the people. They don't believe that. You know, the typical attitude of the Cameroonian is, we will do how now? On va faire comment? You know, and yet in all sectors, we are all living the effects of bad governance, of dictatorship, of confusion in governmental circles and all of that. But we act as if the victims of these things are other people. Or we act as if it is other people who are going to come and extricate us, remove us from this situation. No. I mean, I am only an advocate. I'm probably a voice in the wilderness, but let me be that voice in the wilderness. Cameroonians, whether Anglophone or Francophone, whether it be in connection with the Anglophone crisis or in connection with all the other things that are happening in our country from north to south, east to west, no one other than you standing up will force a situation where solutions are found to your problems. Some people may interpret this as saying, oh, Simon Munzu is calling for insurrection and all of that, because that's how the regime thrives. They throw words around, frighten people, make it look like I'm not going to join this because I'll be termed an insurrectionist, a terrorist, an opposant, I will lose my job, and so on. Yeah. But remember, we in Cameroon is not the only country where regimes that veer towards dictatorship exist. Other countries have had the same thing. Other countries have had concerns about their jobs, their career, and so on. But when the time comes, when the people say enough is enough, they do something about it. I don't need to start citing you examples, because even a child in our villages in Cameroon has heard of many examples in North Africa, in West Africa, in Central Africa, and so on. So let's stop looking for excuses. What we call civil society in Cameroon is not organized. We have civil society organizations working individually. This one is concentrating on investigating human rights. This one says it is engaging in peace building through seminars and so on. This one says it is engaging in humanitarian activities through the distribution of food to IDPs and so on. All of which are very important things, yes. We need to take care of IDPs. We need to work for peace, especially through the participation of women to look for peace. We need to investigate human rights abuses and eventually hold those who perpetrated them, those who committed them, accountable. So all that work is very important. But initiatives like those, activities like those, do not lead us towards addressing the root causes of the ills plaguing our society. So you talk about the chiefs. In the North and Southwest, there are chiefs conferences at regional level. The Southwest Chiefs Conference, the Northwest Funds Union. There are chiefs conferences at divisional level. There are chiefs conferences at subdivisional level. What is stopping our chiefs in those conferences from discussing the things that are affecting their subjects and taking a resolution to say, this war has gone on for too long. We really are tired of it, but we cannot just keep. We call upon. If it requires that we all lead a delegation to Yaoundé to go and lay siege, to be received there to put our grievances, we are going to do so. If it requires that people kill all of us because we are attempting to do that, then let all of us die. There has to be that kind of response.
Okay. Yeah, but
and that is only for chiefs, but the same thing can be said for religious authorities and religious leaders. In countries like the DRC, to take just one example, we know what a frontline role the Catholic bishops, the National Episcopal Conference of Congolese bishops play. Everyone, even a child knows. You mentioned the name Desmond Tutu in the days of the anti-apartheid movement. They tell you what Desmond Tutu did as a religious. He didn't content himself with issuing pastoral letters or preaching to his converts in his sermon in church every day. No, he stepped out because there comes a point where, you know, the social responsibility of the church, whether it be Catholic or Presbyterian or Baptist or whatever, requires that church leaders in the face of this, of what is happening, stand up and say, we are peace-loving people, but if in order to make our point, if people are going to stop us from making our point, then even if it means that they kill us, we have to make our point. But we don't see that in Cameroon, Mr. Kum. We don't see that. We don't see that.
Yeah, but
definitely, you know, they will come. That point will come. That point will come.
Okay.
That point will come.
Yes, but we would not want to give the impression that we are calling for an insurrection in Cameroon.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm sure you are talking about.
Absolutely not. We are not calling. Absolutely not. We're not calling for insurrection, but no, we're not calling for insurrection. But let the fear of words, let the fear of words not be an excuse for people to do nothing about their situation.
Okay.
No one is calling for an insurrection.
Okay. Now you want an active civil society. You want the chiefs to get more active, to make their voices known on the concerns and the plight of the people. You want the church more involved in political or other activities. And but now we are talking about a period in our history where most Cameroonians are talking about elections next year. We have others who have been talking about the need for an Anglophone presidency, and you have been quiet on these issues. Is it that you are also disinterested, or it is a moment for all the quarters that you have just cited to get more active and then get people to register with a LECAM and then make their decisions known through the ballot box?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. No, I mean, as you know, even from abroad, where I was forced to live with all those threats against my life, because it is not out of Cameroon that I had planned to be at this time of my life. I was expecting to retire in Cameroon quietly, and I prepared my little base for retirement in Victoria, in Limbe. That's where I prefer to be now. But I'm out of the country due to the circumstances that we mentioned earlier in this program. But nevertheless, even from here, I am following very closely what is happening in Cameroon and collaborating or working with like-minded people for us to move things forward. So from that perspective, obviously, I salute the enthusiasm with which Cameroonians are mobilizing to register to vote, because peaceful change, and that is what I advocate peaceful change, can come through the ballot box. It can come through the ballot box. So let's not lose faith in the possibility of change through the ballot box. Therefore, Cameroonians should go, as they are doing, go out massively and register to vote. But after they have registered to vote, they must, when the time comes, go out massively and vote. Vote the candidates of their choice. And when they will have voted the candidates of their choice, they must also be prepared they must remain vigilant to monitor the processes of counting the ballots, declaring results, and so on and so forth, as we see citizens do in other countries. So I may not personally have come as frequently as I would have liked to do in this call for people to go and vote. I think I've issued statements about that once or twice, but I am part of, as you know, Mr. Kum, I am part of the coalition of Cameroon federalist groups and activists, the CCFGA, a movement that is advocating a return to the federal system as a solution to the problems of our country. And this movement is very active right now. in Cameroon, amongst other partners, in the voter registration drive. So we are doing something in that respect. As for the thing, I've heard all this talk about it's time for an Anglophone president. Well, I mean, as an Anglophone, maybe I'm expected to applaud and jubilate and say, yes, it's time for an Anglophone president. But Mr. Kum, let's not be emotional. Let's not be emotional. What are those calls based on? What are they founded on? Between you and me, in a country where the Constitution has provisions concerning the conditions of eligibility to be president of the Republic, where the electoral law has very clear rules about the conduct of elections to become president, on what basis are you going to tell Francophones today, all of you step aside, allow only Anglophones to contest this forthcoming presidential election? Does that make sense to you? Do you expect them to step aside and allow Anglophones to do that? Now, what if Anglophones aspire to be, if an Anglophone aspires to be president, nothing stops that Anglophone from jumping into the fray, organizing a political movement that attracts people from across the 10 regions of the country, get himself or herself elected, and become president. But you're not going to get an Anglophone becoming president by some kind of decree or by backdoor negotiations. No. You know, we cannot have our cake and eat it, or some people say, eat your cake and have it. Now, on the one hand, you will hear Anglophones telling you that the late John Frundi's presidential victory was stolen in 1992. All right. Now, what does that mean? They are saying that Frundi, an Anglophone, won the majority of votes in Cameroon, Anglophone and Francophone Cameroon. When they say that he was voted as president in 1992, they are not saying that he was voted as president in 1992 by Anglophones. It was by Anglophones, and even more heavily, given the disparity in population between the two, even more heavily decisively by Francophones. In other words, in 1992, if we are to believe this theory, in 1992, it was proven that given the right message, the right leadership, the right candidate, and so on, Francophones are capable of voting an Anglophone to be president, as it is claimed that they voted Frundi to be president. Okay, so anyone calling for an Anglophone president, which in itself is a good call. I'm not disputing that. It's a good call. It's a good aspiration, you know, especially given what we've gone through this past 60 years plus. It's a good aspiration. But once again, typical of Cameroon, they leave it at the level of a call. The headline, it grabs headlines. People argue about that from morning to night, and end of story. How? Do you ask yourself how the Anglophone is going to become president? Will Francophones, are you going to ask, just to call a few names, come October 2025, you tell Mr. Paul Biya, you tell Mr. Maurice Kamto, you tell Mr. Kabar Libi, and whoever else is out there, Francophone, aspiring to be president, you tell them, please, you guys step aside, this time is for Anglophones. How? On the other hand, nothing stops us from identifying an Anglophone who has a message that Anglophones identify with, but which Francophones also would identify with, and saying, let us, Anglophone and Francophone, put our weight behind this person. That person, when elected, will become president. He will be an Anglophone because he or she is an Anglophone, but he or she will not have become elected president just because they are Anglophone, but because their program, their profile, was attractive to Anglophones and Francophones alike in this country. So to end on that, Mr. Kum, my advice to those who are pushing this theory of an Anglophone president is that don't content yourselves with talking about that in your social groups, your WhatsApp groups. Organize, identify an Anglophone, throw your weight behind him or her, sell that Anglophone's program to the rest of the country, to the rest of Cameroon, and get all people from all the 10 regions of Cameroon to vote for that Anglophone. Then you will have an Anglophone president. There's no other way around it.
Okay, then you have an Anglophone president. I want us to go back to this conference, which could not take place in 2018 and 19. Calls are coming back for it to hold today. You say that your prescription is for the government to sort out the armed conflict with separatists, and then the possibility for Anglophones to meet up with amongst themselves and engaging government. Now, the political class, do you think they are going to be willing to engage in this, given their reaction? What will be the difference from a possible reaction from the political class of the 2018 and 19 to those who are obtained today? Do you think they may have learned some lessons and see need for them to hearken to this call and engage in pushing for Anglophones to come together?
Yes, indeed. I'm hoping that they've learned the lessons of the first attempt, and that from those lessons, they can, number one, decide to be more engaged, because you see, there was no reason, if our members of parliament are representing our people, if our senators are representing our people, there was no reason for the SDF and the CPDM parliamentarians back in 2018 not to take up this cause and even go towards the head of state and say, please, Mr. President, our people are dying unnecessarily. This problem is simple. Let's face facts. Let's sort it out. And and see what the president would do or what he would say. But for them not even to take it up at all, they censored themselves and stopped themselves. It would have been so much better to be told that, yes, they wrote a memorandum or they asked for audience with the president and the president turned them down. That would be a different matter. But Mr. Kum, for 7-8 years, for these people not even to have tried, the SDF parliamentarians every now and again stood up on the floor of the National Assembly and raised voices on this, but it was limited there. There comes a point where these people have to decide where their first loyalties lie. Is it with the people whom they purport to have elected them and whom they purport to be representing in the National Assembly, or is it their party and its leader? They've got to be brought to us to ask and answer that question, because it's unthinkable. So I'm hoping, therefore, that if the idea is to come back on the table, I'm hoping that mechanisms will be found to engage political members of parliament and senators openly and directly. They have to be made to choose between loyalty to their people and the welfare of their people, and allegiance to the leaders of their party. Similarly, I don't see why on Sundays, Mr. Kum, on Sundays, you and I know that our churches of all denominations are full, packed full. Who's filling them? It's Christians, right? It's Muslims in terms of the Islam, our Islamist brothers and sisters. In other words, these believers are the ones. But so, if you are the population who are suffering, and you are the same people whom these cardinals and archbishops and bishops and priests and pastors and imams and so on say that they are shepherding, do you think that you're not entitled to get that bishop, that archbishop, that imam, that pastor, that priest to say, you must show us the way on this matter. You cannot sit on the fence. In other countries, religious leaders in situations like this are amongst the people who spearhead the efforts of the population, of the people. Same thing for religious leaders. I mean, how can our fonts and chiefs be in their palaces, for those of them who have not yet left their palaces? How can they fail as a group? Because if you act alone, the establishment picks you easily. But what stops them? What stops the Northwest Fonts Union? What stops the Southwest Chiefs Conference from taking up a battle like this? Okay, if they wouldn't do it on their own initiative as they ought to do, then what stops you, their subjects, from going to the palace to remind the Fon that he is our leader, he is our natural leader, we want to follow him, but he must lead. He must lead. So there has to come a point where the population as civil society plays its role in this manner to get its civil society leaders to act. So in short, what I'm saying is the circumstances surrounding this initiative in 2016, 2017, 2018 are different from 2024, 2025, partly because, at least in 2016, 2017, 2018, we could plead that we did not see what the consequences of this crisis and this war would be for our population. We could plead that. We didn't know. We didn't see them. But Mr. Kum, which pastor, which archbishop, which bishop, which priest, which imam, which chief, which fund, which member of parliament, which senator can come in 2024 and 2025 and say he or she has not seen, is not conscious of the consequences of the situation that we are living today? They don't have that benefit anymore because we have all seen what this can lead to. And so the question becomes, having seen what this has led to, are they prepared to drag their feet or sit on the fence as they did in 2016, 2017, 2018, in 2024, 2025, going perhaps to 2026?
Now, what about the situation of the separatists themselves? Do you think they also are going by the consequences of what we all have lived, as you have enumerated, going to see reason to take this proposal the more serious, especially the fact that some of them, like you take Capo Daniel, clearly is shifted grounds. There are others who no longer even believe in what they believed in 2017 and 2018 at the time you were calling for this conference.
Yeah. No, I mean, Mr. Kum, it's the same phenomenon. The past 4 years or so, especially from, let us say, 2019 to to now, the past 5 years, have taught us a lesson. Even the most callous separatists are aware that the havoc, the damage, the suffering that their war with the government is inflicting upon our population, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable because at the end, they are alienating the same people whom they say they are fighting for. You know, I mean, they are in the process, they've created a reverse situation where, do you know why we have in Norway and Southwest what is sometimes referred to as people of the 11th province? That's a term that came up when we were in the context of the All Anglophone Conferences 1 and 2. You know, people whom, Cameroonians, whose ancestral origins are in places like, say, Bamileke land, Bassa land, Ewondo land, and so on. But who, back in the 50s, migrated, running away from what? For some of them running away from forced labor, what they call in geogmancy, running away from forced labor when they were building the railway in Konsamba, Douala, and all of that. You know, running away from the effects of the terrorism that was, terrorist war, the Makiza war that was raging there in those days, and so on and so forth. Running away from the scarcity of land in some cases, and so on. They crossed to the Anglophone side even before independence and reunification. So all this is happening before 1961. So they crossed to our side, they were welcomed there, they settled, and they had the children there from generation to generation. So you will find a Kumba boy, a Mankon boy, you know, a Muyuka boy, a Tiko boy, you know, whose ancestral origins are Bamileke or Bassa and so on. But as far as we are concerned, they were all Southern Cameroonians, Anglophones. Okay? And when this thing came about, people saying, oh, the provinces, initially now regions, it became a matter of, but okay, where do you classify these people? Because there are those who say, no, they're not natives. They're not natives. And that concept of 11th province, at the time when there were 10 provinces in the country, came up. Mr. Kum, what is happening now? We are planting the seeds of a reverse situation. Since the separatist war of quote-unquote independence, which they say was declared by Mr. Biya, by President Biya, if you like, has forced hundreds of thousands of Cameroonians of Northwest, Southwest origin to the Francophone regions, some of them to go to primary school and so on. You think those children are all going to come back? You think all those families are all going to come back? No. We are planting the seeds of the reverse of what happened in the 50s. It's not happening in this our time, where Anglophones are going to settle in those places, and tomorrow they will be the object of definition of the 12th province. You know, so these things are complex. We should not approach them with a simplistic lens. And I am convinced that even the separatist leaders are looking for an honorable way out. They're looking for an honorable way out. They know that they've reached a blind alley. They've hit their head against the wall. They're looking for an honorable way out to turn around and get out of it. And if the chips are down, and you yourself have noted that one by one, they're beginning to see reason, I'm sure that the chips are down and the proper conditions are created to give them a sensitive level of comfort and assurance and so on, don't be surprised that many of them will come back to the path of reason, which is in the middle. It's not the extremist part of separation of independence. It is not the extremist part of domination and assimilation. It is a centrist path where we all have to converge and find a way for Anglophones to enjoy their autonomy within Cameroon without breaking away from Cameroon.
Okay, we have come to the end of tonight's edition of the program. Don't know whether you have one last word for those watching us tonight.
Well, I mean, my message is let's not despair. Cameroon belongs to all of us. Let's not despair. Let's continue to talk. And I, for my part, I will continue to talk as long as this problem prevails. I am prepared to be a voice crying in the wilderness. But I'd rather be the voice crying in the wilderness than just sit, watch, say nothing while our country continues to go down and down and down. And I believe that the time has come for each one of us, the youth, the women, the men, the chiefs, the fonts, the pastors, the priests, the imams, and all other segments of our society to really put our head down and say the solution to this problem cannot be left only in the hands of the government or only in the hands of separatists. What can I, as a Cameroonian, especially an Anglophone Cameroonian bearing the brunt of this directly or indirectly, what can I do to engage in the search for a solution? Not just talk, not just blah, blah, blah. Engage in the search for a solution. Thank you, Mr. Kum, for this opportunity to interact with your viewers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simon Munzu, for accepting our invitation to talk to our televiewers this night. Just to note that Dr. Simon Munzu was the United Nations Secretary General's Deputy Special Representative for Ivory Coast from October 2014 to August 2016. He had previously served the United Nations in different capacities. We want to say thank you to all of you who took time off to watch this edition of the program and to the production team. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.